today's session, we'll cover the introduction to what Awell Hosted Pages are. So we have different ways that you can actually integrate with the Awell platform. So we will give you an overview to then actually zoom in on the Awell Hosted Pages itself. Then we want to focus on the configuring of Awell Hosted Pages. So while the solution comes out of the box because you actually redirect a patient towards an Awell Hosted page, you still have options in terms of setting your branding and the behavior of Awell Hosted Pages. And afterwards, we'll talk about leveraging Awell Hosted Pages in your care flows so that you can actually utilize it when and where you need it, because as you will learn from the session, they're quite powerful. And then we'll close off with Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat and we'll tackle them at the very end. So anything that pops up, we don't mind answering any of those questions at the very end of the session. And with this, I will kick it over to Raul.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see the presentation.
Okay, cool. The first thing to kind of understand is the interaction with activities piece of the puzzle. So you probably are familiar with the concept of care flows. That's the kind of overarching thing that you're building that coordinates the activities of care teams centered around patients. When it comes to actually getting work done, that our sort of smallest unit of action is the activity. What our orchestration engine does is generate activities. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about activities and how that kind of relates to care flows and what this means, or kind of how this explains the role that Awell Hosted Pages plays before Sana kind of talks about specific ways in which you can leverage it. This is a shot from our developer docs. We provide different ways that you can integrate with Awell. A key part here, aside from kind of the care flow side of things, as well as the data piece, which is on the right, is the middle pillar, which is interacting with activities. And that's how stakeholders, whether they're clinical stakeholders or the patients themselves, and also potentially non-clinical stakeholders, if you've got internal processes as well, how they interact with the flow and how they can essentially read messages, fill in forms, do the work that needs to be done. So there are different options for interacting with activities. The shared one across all stakeholders are Awell Hosted Pages, as well as obviously building your own UI and kind of using as what we call a headless solution, which means that you just use our backend, our API, and you own the application that the patient or the provider or clinician is going to use. Clinicians also additionally have another tool, which is the Awell platform. So we have a care app, which allows you to interact with the activities. Typically, for customers who are using hosted pages or their own UI, Awell platform can be a very useful tool for testing out your care flows and making sure things work, particularly in a sandbox environment, so the pre-production environment before you publish and go live. Now, there are different levels of integration, and here we kind of provide three of the main pillars there. So we'll start from the right-hand side, which is the Awell Orchestration API. So this is when you want to do a custom implementation, what I mentioned earlier about going headless. This essentially says that, we own the application. We're going to look after how the form is presented or how the message should be presented to the end user. And what we just need from Awell is the kind of brains behind the care flow, the if this then logic, or to do a lot of background tasks for us. The Awell Hosted Pages approach, which are the left two, essentially says that we want to, you to help us with the UI, the patient or user-facing aspect as well. There are two flavors here because it can be a one-time session. So this is kind of a very short-lived flow for one user, maybe some things like an onboarding or eligibility flow, whereas there are also more complicated ones like multi-session, multi-user. I'll go into a little bit detail about what these look like in a second. So it's important first to kind of understand the concept of a session. Don't be too worried or scared. A lot of boxes, but it's actually pretty simple. For those of you who are familiar with Careflow building, the top should kind of be a familiar representation of our studio builder. Essentially, this is just a Careflow. You've got, or a track within a Careflow. So it's a single track Careflow. There's a start, there's an end, there's a sequence of steps. You can see that it branches out because there may be some logic on whether you go to step 3A or 3B. A very basic, simple example of a session. Here we want to essentially have something like an onboarding flow where all of the steps involved here are for a single person. For example, not yet a patient, but someone who's a prospect, right? And so at the start of the flow, you want to collect some information from them. You want to collect some more information from them, maybe do a calculation, and then follow up with a message with next steps, for example. Now, to you, the Careflow essentially matches all of the activities that you want them to do. So you can see the Careflow at the top, and then if you look down, essentially this dotted line is the duration of the session. It sort of lasts essentially from the start all the way to the end of the Careflow. It's kind of one-to-one. So when we break this down into the activities, going back to what I mentioned earlier, that all of this is ultimately just to interact with activities, the Careflow becomes this sequence of activities for a person to fill in. So I land up on your website, I click a button, I start a session, and what I'm going to see is this Careflow translated into a series of activities. I get a message, form to fill in, another message, another form, another message. So one thing to point out here, as you can see that in the Careflow design, there's a calculation, but obviously this is something that happens in the background. So obviously it's not a one-to-one of all the actions. It's just Awell Hosted Pages is responsible for the user-facing elements of the Careflow, the ones that you want the stakeholder to interact with. Now, let's go a level deeper. So this is to essentially say that, to kind of articulate the idea that a session is a window into a Careflow. Now, in the previous, we established that the window could be the whole length or duration of a Careflow. Here's to kind of show that actually this could be just a section or a segment of a very long Careflow. Now, in this case, I want to do a few things right at the beginning of the flow, but things that happen afterwards towards the end of the flow are unrelated. It's not for another stakeholder. It's just some machine-to-machine work that I want to do, push some things to my EHR or EMR. So here, the sort of session is a shorter piece. It goes from step 1 to step 2. There's a message, a form, message, a form. Again, there's a background calculation, but the end of it is somewhere after the end of the session. Now, that's by implication, this means that the session is only going to show the things that are relevant for that user. So let's say that this is a patient who's looking at this and filling in some prompts. In that case, what they would see is up to the last form that's assigned to them, and they won't see any of the other stuff that's happening in the Careflow, even if it's, for example, assigned to another user. They won't, when the activities for them are done, the session will end. So this ensures that the window is scoped just to that user. They're not going to see anything that's not meant for them. Additionally, one level deeper now is that we can also have more complex Careflows. It could be long-lived, but also, interestingly, as I mentioned with the second pillar, multi-stakeholder. And so this means that I want a Careflow to, for example, involve some work from a clinician, and then that results in something for a patient to fill in. And so here, more or less the same Careflow, but let's say blue is the clinician, green is the patient. And so here you can see at the bottom, translating this, I need the clinician to interact with something, I need to stop that, and then I need the patient to interact with something. Now, this means that I need 2 sessions. And the first session, as you can see at the bottom, has a message and a form for the clinician to fill in. That'll be the end of their work, they're done. And then at some point later on, now again, this is not going to be immediate, right? They're not sitting next to each other doing this like a relay race. There's going to be a gap of time, could be a day, could be weeks even. That depends on your flow design. But there's a delay between when the first session happens and the second session. That's a really key point to keep note of. But this is possible. You'll have one session for one user followed by another session, and both of these together moves the care flow on forward. Now that you're all seasoned pros with all of the different kinds of flavors of hosted pages and the relationship to care flows, I want to drill or kind of zoom into two scenarios that kind of form the basis of a key question that you will need to answer as you design your flow and as you think about the integration. Essentially, will the user interact with the activities now? So is this sort of a just-in-time kind of session, as I'd like to call it, which is essentially saying, I need to start a flow, I need someone to do something right now. Now, remember, this could be the whole length of the flow, so one-to-one, the flow and the session is kind of matched. Or it could be that I want to start a flow and I need someone to do some things, front load everything, and then in the background at the end, I'm going to do a bunch of other things based on all of that input. So these two things are possible, but essentially, are the activities going to get interacted with immediately? Do I need to start a flow and a session at the same time? The second is, is the one or more users, because it's multi-stakeholder or it could be a single stakeholder, are they going to do it in their own time? Now this is with a delay. So for example, I can have a, you could see the examples at the bottom, but you could have a link that goes to someone that says, hey, in your own time, whenever you read this, can you please do some stuff that we need you to do? That could be via an SMS or an email. There's multi-channel comms that are possible. You could do it via your own UI. So here I've taken a screenshot from our own app, but essentially you can have a button that just says, hey, there's this thing that you need to go do. Can you click this button and we'll take you there? And then also there's this idea that you want someone to interact it with an activity in sequence. So you're saying, hey, I have landed up on your website. I just want to, check if I'm eligible for your services. You give them a link that's static, so you don't need to do any prep work. You just have a link that allows them to click on it. We'll start a flow. We'll start a session. We'll take them there, and they can start filling information. And then you can close the loop later on based on their eligibility or whether the information is provided fully or not. So just wanted to sort of summarize this sort of section. The main sort of problem for you to think about when you're thinking of designing your care flows and if you're keen to use Awell Hosted Pages is that layer of a session. At what point are, whether it's one stakeholder or multiple stakeholders, going to interact with it? With Awell Hosted Pages, we provide you a number of different options for you to get those stakeholders into Hosted Pages to interact with the activities. Again, depending on the scenario, it could be right away, click the button, immediately go and fill it in, or it could be delayed where we sort of say, hey, we're providing you with a link. When you want to click on it and do the work, go ahead and do it. We'll be waiting. So a consideration there of sessions, care flows, and how activities fit into it. I'm going to hand it back to Sana. It's going to talk a little bit about, oh wait, no, sorry, this is me as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can configure your hosted pages. So Awell Hosted Pages is a out-of-the-box app. It's something that we have built for you, and we recognize that you are going to have any organization have their own color scheme, will have a lot of opinionated design elements. And so we wanted to kind of find the right balance and provide something that gives you some customizability without creating something that then sort of leaks over into too much customization. You might need an engineer or someone who understands design deeply to come and fix this for you. So we've basically given you control over some elements of the Awell Hosted Pages experience. So being able to set a page title, a logo, and a color. Within the configuration of the care flow, you can sort of set that at a tenant level. So your whole organization, you want all your hosted pages experience to look the same. Or if you want, you can also color it and brand it differently if you might have different kind of use cases that you wish to look visually different. And this gives you more options. We have a live preview when you're configuring that'll allow you, as you can see on the bottom right, you can kind of see a live update of all the changes that you're making, so you don't need to worry about how it's going to look. The other thing is that there are also some configuration about the behavior of it. So there's auto progress, which you might know that we have two kinds of forms: conversational, traditional. Conversational is question by question. Traditional is a long form. And auto progress basically saves the number of clicks that a user needs to make to progress on a conversational form. And then local autosave, which just means that we save the progress of the form locally. If anything happens, someone needs to reload a page, their app crashes, whatever, their progress in a form, particularly, you might have forms with 12, 20 questions. We want users to not have to suffer and go over again. And quite often you'll have a drop off if that happens. So the settings also can be configured via the API. So localization is also another element. So right now we don't provide a mechanism to set that within our application. But if you're using the API, you can include information that essentially says, I'd like to localize the hosted pages that you show in a number of languages. We have French, Dutch, English, Estonian, and it's very easy to add localization yourself. Even we've had a customer who has added Estonian, and it's very easy to maintain in our public repository. You can also then control the different endpoints for the user. So whether they finish the flow successfully or they quit out and want to interrupt their flow and go and exit out, you can sort of take them to try and rescue them. So take them to a particular URL, or you can sort of take them back to your home page or back to wherever next steps page that you would like to as part of the session. Okay, and now I'll hand back to Sana.
Thank you, Raul. I'm gonna share my screen again as well. Also, while I do that, a quick note about the localization as well, just to make it crystal clear. Setting the patient's language actually means that the buttons that are shown in an Awell hosted page would be translated in a local language. So this would be the next, previous, the redirecting, waiting for new activities. So of course, it's not an entire translation of your CareFlow content, but it's truly those workings of Awell hosted pages, given that that is the subject here as well. So moving forward with leveraging Awell hosted pages. So Rahul already gave a good rundown of what Awell hosted pages are. And so the very first thing that you would actually need to do is include like a call to action with an Awell hosted pages link to then actually land on an Awell hosted page. So before I dive into a couple of examples to make this clear, I want to explain how this actually works at design time and then at runtime, because you all know that the Awell platform consists out of Awell Studio, where you build what you want to show and what you want your stakeholders to do. And then at runtime, our orchestration engine kicks in. And there are a couple of things that we actually wanted to highlight here. So at design time, you're going to select the right call to action. So this could be email, this could be SMS. And as you can see here in the screenshot as well, there's a healthy logo where it says send a chat message. So that would be a chat message to the patient where you then insert an Awell hosted pages link in that call to action. And then afterwards, you actually build all those message and form activities for the stakeholder to complete. So this is what Rahul was alluding to as well. You need to appreciate and respect the right sequence of events. So that call to action goes out, and then you build whatever you want the patient to see and to complete. It can be a single form, it can be 20 forms. That's all up to you, which as part of your CareFlow design in Awell Studio. Then continuing with runtime. So when we talk about including that Awell hosted pages link, and I'll definitely show that in a second as well. So in Awell Studio, you have the ability to actually scope an Awell hosted page for a given stakeholder, for example, patient stakeholder, and then you build those activities for them to complete. So it's not truly visible in Awell Studio what that link will look like, because it's actually auto-generated at runtime. So when the orchestration engine kicks in and it comes across such an Awell hosted pages link, it gets generated on the fly, and it's unique and scoped per patient care flow. So what that means is if you actually have multiple activities to do over a lengthy period of time, let's say you would have a care flow that takes care of sending out surveys once per week for an entire month, then actually the Awell hosted page that would be generated with every call to action once per week would actually be identical. So also, if a user would have ignored one of the nudges, one of the messages, and would actually click on an older Awell hosted pages link, they will still be brought back to where they actually dropped off initially. If that was, for example, week 2, and they clicked in week 4 on the link, they will actually be taken back to the designed activities that you had installed into your care flow. So you don't have to worry about sending tons of different links and patients actually losing out on what they need to do. The orchestration engine will take care of that because it will exactly actually know where the patient is in that care flow and what activities were completed and were not completed. Also, here the piece about they do not expire is important because here we made the association with Awell hosted sessions that expire. So the link themselves, as long as there are still pending activities for a patient, those links won't expire. Even if you have a care flow that spends 1 month and the patient only reacts after 6 months, stumbles across the email, clicks on it, they can actually still complete their pending activities. They do not expire. As long as the care flow is still active, is not completed, canceled, deleted, the patient can actually still complete all of their pending activities. And then the last piece is just where we want to clarify that the sessions themselves, so once a patient would click on such an Awell hosted pages link, they get brought to an Awell hosted page and the session starts. And if the patient is not active, is not interacting with the survey, is not filling out any responses, is not acknowledging the messages, then those sessions will expire after 1 hour of inactivity. And also that counter actually extends. So let's say patient is a little bit inactive between activity 2 and 3. When they complete activity 2, like the session extends and again counts back, or the counter is set for 1 hour. So in total, they can take longer, just no inactivity for more than 1 hour at runtime. So if we talk then about explicit use cases, so where can you use Awell hosted pages links? So they are available in a ton of Awell actions. And so actions are the most granular level that we have in Awell Studio. So you have care flows, you have tracks, you have steps, and then you have actions. So those are the things that you want stakeholders to complete. So here, for example, on the left-hand side, we see create task, create charting node. So you can avoid that clinicians need to switch tag and insert a link in the Awell extension actions. And here I explicitly highlighted healthy, but the same is true for relation, is also true for Canvas Medical. So there you have the option to actually, within a create task activity, for example, you actually include an Awell hosted page and ask the clinician to report their feedback through an Awell hosted pages link. Because probably you actually don't want your clinicians to switch back to Awell Care. That is a tool that it is available, but to actually go out of their regular tech stack to complete an Awell form, to actually then go back, you don't have to do that. You can keep them within their existing tech by making use of Awell hosted pages. And of course, there as well, you always need to make sure that there are activities pending. So after you create a task or you create a charting node, wherever you feel more comfortable that a clinician will go to it and will complete the Awell hosted page, you include the link and then thereafter the necessary message and form activities so you can capture their input. Also part of this, just if your particular EHR was not listed on the previous slide, so you can also insert an Awell hosted pages link in a REST or a GraphQL API call. So this also just means that you don't necessarily need to make use of Awell extensions to actually leverage those Awell hosted pages. Those can still be inserted in regular API call actions so that you can pull them in and then still show them within your proprietary care app for a clinician to complete when the time is there. So that was tip number 1. Definitely don't see it as only a patient solution, but also a clinician solution. They can also report feedback, follow up on their next steps through Awell hosted pages. So moving one step further, so we talked about Awell Hosted Pages for patients, including that in a CTA, but what we also want to clarify that you can actually choose, and you build that into your design, that you can actually make use of different extension actions and different tech stack to actually send out your Awell Hosted Pages. So what does that mean? You, maybe the first time you want to ask a patient to complete a survey, you send them an email or you send them a chat message via your EHR. If they don't respond, then you can actually also send them an SMS with that same Awell Hosted Pages link, so they will still see the same activities, fill them out in the exact same way as if they would do it directly from another choice of third party. So lower those barriers and follow up by using email or SMS, switch in channels, and see which actually yield better compliance results. And then the last piece that we wanted to bring you here is follow up when or before a patient drops out by using a secondary channel. So what we mean with that is, as we talked about, Awell Hosted Pages being active for 1 hour as long as the patient is active. What if you have a very long onboarding flow and a patient actually decides to drop out? It's taking too long and they just want to do it the next day. There's not always a way for a patient to go back to there. If they received an SMS or if they received an email, they can always go back to the original email and SMS and just begin where they left off. But at the same time, if you send it out via, like if there would be a button on your website, they're halfway through the onboarding flow, there's no way for them to actually pick in versus just clicking on that button again and completing it from the very beginning. So what we do advise you is, as part of the Careflow design, just send them an SMS or send them an email as well, so that in case they drop out accidentally or on purpose, you actually have a way to guide them back and say, look, this is where you dropped off before. You can pick in again here. So if they would have read the first messages, the first forms, those would still be stored. They're part of the Awell Careflow, but at least they can complete the onboarding when it's useful for them. So that is what we had in store as part of the explanation that we wanted to give. What I'll also do is just highlight or give a quick demo of how this works, so that we're actually all on the same page. So I have here my dedicated sandbox environment. So I'm right now in care. And what I've done is already pre-creating a patient that was here. So I'm going to start up a care flow because I want to send digital resources to a given patient. And so this care flow is now manually started. That's just a way to make the demo easier. But of course, we could listen to webhooks. You could actually call our API and start up a given care flow. So multiple different ways to actually interact with Awell and get a care flow triggered, but that's not the focus for this session. So I'm going to start a care flow, and if we have a quick look at what's happening. So within this care flow, given that there's only very limited information that I'm giving it, this is the ID. The first thing that the care flow is going to do is actually get the patient resources. So what we do is connecting to Healthy. We enter the patient ID, and what we get returned is a primary provider ID, because unfortunately, that's information we need to post a chat message. And I'm also pulling the patient's first name, which is actually myself. What we're also doing, and maybe actually I'll quickly show this to you in parallel as well. So as part of these sent resources, we're going to do like a little bit of A/B testing. So we're doing this by simply including a math calculation. So the math calculation generates a random number between 0 and 1. And so it spits out a 0 or a 1. So I know it's very predictable. So when it's a 0, it will actually send out resources number 1 over chat. If it's a 1, it will send out the other resources. And this is just a way as well for you to play around with the Careflow logic and see what actually sticks best. So as part of then those resources, so quickly showing that to you. So we're sending the chat message quickly configured by using that Healthy patient ID, using the primary provider ID, and addressing the patient with first name, and letting them know that we believe that this video may be of interest to them. And then also we're asking for feedback through an Awell Hosted Pages link. So this was now created, by the way. Actually, I'll also just open up Healthy so that we can follow along with what's happening there and not just purely in the Awell Care UI. Come on, Healthy. Yes. So I've landed actually on, this is the chat message functionality or window within Healthy. And so you see that actually right now, 2 minutes ago, I received this chat message addressing myself with first name and providing the information that we believe that this video may be helpful for that patient. And then afterwards, please let us know your feedback after watching. And so clicking on it, a new page opens that will load the branding that I've installed in the care flow and that corresponds to the behavior. So there's just a single question: was this information relevant? And I'll just tick yes, after which the care flow ends, all activities are completed, and I can close this page. So I'm also not or I don't lose the window that I was originally active in. And so if we have a quick look at Awell Care as well, we see that all of those items were logged, and you can follow along in the UI here too, which is pretty cool for testing purposes as well, even if your clinicians would not make use of Awell Care. And so that was, in a nutshell, that we wanted to bring you guys today in terms of what Awell Hosted Pages are, how you can insert those Awell Hosted Pages links in multiple different locations, API calls, extension actions, and we're opening the floor up to questions.